I mean, I had to say to one teacher who said that there were 100 different genders, and I had to say, look, that you're just wrong. I was like the golden boy of primary education. I was on Channel 4 News, did an item which was the most watched item they'd ever done to date. It was like 17 million people on Facebook alone were watching this thing on my outdoor learning stuff and all the rest of it. I was in The Guardian, I was in The Times, The Telegraph. I was like, they called me the hunky headmaster. There was a piece in The Guardian called The School with Guns and Knives on the Timetable and Ofsted Loves It. So I could do no wrong. The third complaint came in under Prevent, which is the government's sort of terrorist program. So I was being framed as a terrorist, basically. There is a social credit system operating in Great Britain.
Hello and welcome to the Resistance Podcast. I'm here with Britain's most outspoken head teacher, Mike Fairclough, from Hope, Sussex, and the only head teacher who actually opposed the lockdowns.
I'm saying now that I'm an educator and an author. I'm no longer a head teacher. I was a head teacher for 19 years, from 2004 to last year, but I'm still very much involved in education, do outdoor learning projects with my wife and various other things. We've got something called the Temple in Sussex, which we're running as well, which is a structure in our garden, oak framed building where we do yoga and meditation. My wife's a yogi as well as a law teacher, law lecturer. And lots of different things. And then, but on the horizon, there's a possibility of us moving abroad for education work as well in November. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm an author of 4 books. The most recent one, The Hero's Voice, which looks at the mythological hero's quest as a template and a model to inspire the free speech quest to talk about politically sensitive and controversial topics and write various articles. I've just written one for The Defender, written for the Daily Skeptic, Brownstone Institute, that kind of thing. There's been lots of change recently, but it's that's just how it is, yeah.
So do you want to talk a little bit about your time as a head teacher and how you tended to differ in a lot of ways from some other head teachers?
Yeah. So when I took over the school in 2004, within a year, made quite a number of changes in terms of the curriculum. So I wanted it to be really creative and driven by the imagination. And my background's actually as an artist. So I was a classroom teacher, a deputy head and a classroom teacher before that, since 1995. But prior to that, I'd been an art student for 5 years. So kind of in my heart, in my soul, I'm sort of an artist. So I created something called Room 13, which was inspired by a project of the same name up in Scotland, and that was about creative autonomy and freedom and letting kids just kind of explore things through the arts in a really kind of creative free flow way. Then within another year of being there, took over an area of 120 acres of marshland opposite the school site. So there was, although the school's in Eastbourne and in a town, there's like this wonderful marshland in the middle of Eastbourne, geographically in the middle of Eastbourne, which I took over basically. The lease was up from the local authority, and I said to them I wanted to run history projects from there because it was also on the site of the second largest Bronze Age settlement in Europe. So 3,000 years ago, it's not impossible that some of the kids at the school, their ancestors, could have been living in raised wooden structures on the marshes and hunting and fishing and doing all of that kind of stuff there. And it's such a significant site that some of the artifacts are actually in the British Museum. So really phenomenal. Because of course, like being in marshland, things like wood are actually preserved.
Yeah. They're sort of fossilized, aren't they?
Yeah, well, not really even fossilized. It's actually just like, it's just preserved, like it's still wet. It's like you can actually, but it takes a lot to preserve them once you take them out. So a lot of these things are still underground. But anyway, so I did that, then started to introduce animals to the school, starting with chickens, then we've got goats, then we've got pigs, then we've got a herd of sheep.
So you got the kids back to nature, essentially.
Yeah. We then got hold of a herd of water buffalo, so 6 Asian water buffalo, which we put on our field, and they all escaped within the first week. I ended up down at Eastbourne Seafront, and on BBC News, it was like, and then that happened quite a number of times actually, but everyone was fine about it. But underpinning all of this stuff is character education. So the kind of educational ethos that I've developed over the years is inspired partly by the field of positive psychology. So Martin Seligman's positive psychology, that's looking at our strengths rather than our weaknesses. So, for example, there seems to be a huge amount of emphasis on anxiety at the moment, and has been for about 3 years, as if like by looking at anxiety, it's going to disappear, or even that it's a possibility or even desirable to get rid of anxiety, which I don't think it is. I think every day we all feel anxious about something. It's just life. But rather than focusing on it in order to diminish it, what positive psychology does is say things like, okay, build resilience instead, because the more resilient you become, the stronger you become, then the less anxious you feel about all sorts of different things.
And you take the kids a bit outside of their comfort zone and push them and challenge them.
Exactly that. So it's the psychological concept of moving beyond the comfort zone, which is like 100-year-old psychological concept of moving into the point of optimal anxiety. So that's where you can actually make rapid leaps in your self-development. You have to move into uncertainty, into the unknown, and to move beyond your comfort zone in order to then find, what you're made of, basically. So the children working out on the land, every single child would learn to light a fire, cook over an open fire, taught the kids to shoot 410 shotguns, air rifles. Obviously, they looked after the animals. Some of the kids skinned rabbit, plucked pigeons, that kind of stuff. And it would be in all temperatures. So even in sub-zero temperatures, children would be outside making fires and all the rest of it. Now, what that would do is like even the most vulnerable child, the sort of emotionally fragile child, would be empowered through that process. There was another time we had, we got hold of a million black bees, which are the original like Bronze Age bee, which I didn't even know about until we got them. And we introduced those to the school, had 8 beehives, and then got the kids through some friends who were beekeepers to learn about beekeeping in a really non-invasive way. They were kind of natural beekeepers. And seeing these kids who would be running away from a single wasp or bee in the playground, suiting up, and then having hundreds of them all over them when the lid comes off the hive. When they would come out of that experience and unsuit, their pupils would be dilated, their hair would be on their, they've expanded and they've moved beyond their comfort zone. They've moved beyond their fears, and they've like, all right, I can do this now. So those sorts of character traits are then transferable to the classroom. So that resilience that you can gain from being able to, the grit and resilience of being outside in all temperatures can then be transferable to the classroom, because of course you need to have academic resilience as well. There's no good just kind of like doing all of this stuff and yet with reading, writing and maths, if the children can't do that, there's no good. But what it means is that you can then push through the pain barrier there, because there's loads of times when children and adults, but we're talking about kids, where they won't really want to do something because it's difficult. But that's the whole point. That is actually what life is about. Unless we equip ourselves and our children with the means to be able to deal with adversity and trials and tribulations and all the rest of it, then when big things come along, they're not going to be able to handle it. And that could be losses in the case of close personal deaths, bereavements, ending of relationships, work, whatever it might be, or, global crises.
Or even hearing people have different opinions, because you've got this sort of fragility
Yes.
of all of these people at university.
Yeah, absolutely. And being able for somebody to have a different opinion to you, and to be able to, in a not an aggressive way, to be able to have some sort of discourse where you have a difference of opinion with someone. That's good, and actually. Growing up, I grew up in the 70s, and I was very fortunate actually. Both of my parents I think this is where I kind of get a lot of my sort of ethos from. So that both of them grew up in World War II. So my dad was 10 years old when he was in Manchester during the Blitz. He was never evacuated because he was from an Irish immigrant family. And his father, so my paternal grandfather, was in World War One. He was in the Cameron Highlanders and fought in the Battle of the Somme. So I grew up with these sort of stories of grit and resilience. And on my mum's side, my mum's father, he was in the Long March to Freedom, which was, so he was a prisoner of war in Eastern Europe. And at the end of the war, Hitler, he was like concerned about the Russians coming and attacking them, he just ordered everyone to march west, which they did. And it was like 1,000 miles, loads of people died on the way and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And he's survived. And I remember speaking to him about the war, because as a child, obviously you want to know things like how many people did you shoot and that kind of stuff, you know. And he would always be that very kind of stiff upper lip, kind of like, well, you know, we just got on with it, really. So I've kind of had that sort of heritage and background, which I think has sort of served me well, and that's what I like to try and impart on the kids in my care as well. Not to the point where it's an endurance test, because life, you know, you can burn out if you're just outside of your comfort zone the whole time. It's not that you can't chill out and do different things. There's absolutely a place for that, and I think it can tip over into almost an addictive pattern of like, I've got to feel out of my comfort zone the whole time.
Yeah,
So
there's thrill seeking.
Yeah.
But basically the principle is, if a child has been covered with 1,000 bees and survived, if they've been outside in sub-zero temperatures and survived,
Yeah.
if they've managed to, you know, be trained to handle a firearm and not killed anyone,
Yeah.
or significantly injured anyone, and if they've been put through their paces in different ways in a controlled environment where it's safe,
Yes. Yeah.
but they feel that fear,
Yeah.
and they overcome that fear,
Yeah.
then when they're challenged with many things in life, people having different opinions,
Yeah.
or they're in, you know, a situation where the government's telling them exactly what they need to do, and
Exactly.
they're being faced with so-called authority.
Yeah.
When, you know, they're being pushed at their job and they're not sure whether they can overcome a task,
Yeah.
they can do their best.
That's
and
exactly
adapt,
it.
overcome, and remain calm.
Yeah.
And even in exams, they're not going to be sitting there in a test and go, "Oh no, this is the end of the world," because they go, "Yeah, I had 1,000 bees on me. You know, writing an essay is not that bad."
Yeah, exactly. And so if you've always got some kind of benchmark for whatever you're kind of dealing with, then and the kind of higher that is, then the more you're able to kind of cope with and deal with. So yeah, you've explained that absolutely beautifully, and that's exactly the philosophy that that I've kind of written my books about, and that I've introduced to my school, and that I'm continuing in a small way with Sandeep Satara, my wife, and the local kids at weekend courses and stuff. But it's something that I also want to be able to take abroad if I'm successful in this job that I'm looking for at the moment.
So, can you tell me a little bit about your transition out of the state system? Because you became quite famous at the start of the lockdowns because you were the only head teacher who came out against a lot of what the government was pushing. And it's remarkable because you were the only one in the country.
Yeah, that's still something which I find really bizarre. So there are 43,500 head teachers and school principals in the United Kingdom, and I was the only one to publicly express concerns about the COVID vaccine rollout to children. And lots of my colleagues privately agreed with me, but they said, look, we don't want to say anything because it might affect our jobs. Now, over the years, I've analysed this and looked at some of the mechanisms in place which enabled that to happen for them to be silent. And it's things like the censorship industrial complex, essentially. So we had the psychological nudge unit influencing and steering public opinion at the time. And we also had the counter disinformation unit, the CDU, the rapid response unit as well, surveilling British citizens who were considered to be sort of dissident voices, and across the political spectrum. And that was anyone who's questioning the merits of lockdowns or masking or vaccines, etc. And many people were on their kind of extremist watch list, including me. I did a a subject access request to the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, and I was on their watch list for saying things like, one of the examples was, I said, children have wonderful immune systems. That was enough for them to
Put you
be
on the
triggered.
terror watch list.
Yeah.
So you, the government was watching you, and may still be watching you as a terrorist right now.
And I was also anonymously reported to my former employer on 3 consecutive occasions for publicly and moderately, I would say, questioning the COVID vaccine rollout to kids. So I was very careful in all of my communication to align myself with people and platforms which were considered reputable. So I'd often use mainstream media stuff like the Telegraph or the Mail. I was working closely with people like Molly Kingsley from Us for Them, and various kind of lawyers and other media peoples, kind of aligning our kind of messaging and making sure that we were, trying to get the job done, basically.
So not use just your reputation, because there are many people speaking out, but you actually had a position and a proper office from which you could speak.
Yeah, and that's why I kept it only to the vaccines in terms of like red pilling people. So my concern was, I was always thinking, right, I'm trying to communicate with parents, not necessarily parents in my own school, but like the wider parental community in the world, and thinking, okay, what if someone's got a completely different view to mine, or they're in the balance? So I just need to be able to communicate things in a way which is understood. So I'd always say 4 simple things in various forms. One, children are at extremely low risk of serious illness from COVID, which is what we were told from quite early on by the authorities, government, NHS, etc. That's never changed. Secondly, the COVID vaccines pose known and very serious risks, and that includes serious injury and death. Thirdly, there's no long-term safety data for the COVID vaccines, unlike the other traditional vaccines. And finally, a child can still catch and spread COVID when vaccinated against the virus. And then I would say, in my personal opinion, I feel that the risks from the vaccines outweigh any possible benefit. But that was enough to inspire those who had been sort of evangelized by this sort of
religious mob.
I mean, it had become like a religion, and so I was then a heretic who had to be burnt at the stake. So there were 3 independent investigations into me, and for which I was cleared every single time. Every single time they would say, well, everything he said is lawful. You might not like it, but it's lawful.
And all of these investigations were basically into exactly the same thing.
Yeah. But the third complaint came in under Prevent, which is the government's sort of terrorist program. So I was being framed as a terrorist, basically. So I'd already been kicked off Twitter, the first Twitter, permanently, reinstated under Elon Musk a few months later. But when that third one, my only communication was through Facebook, and no one ever pressed like anyway. It's like I would always be posting knowing that people would be reading stuff, and knowing that people wouldn't really want to be showing their allegiance to me or their allegiance to the message that I was giving, but I still sent it anyway. So I'd get like 3 likes on a Facebook page or something like that, but that was enough to still trigger people to that extent. So, but anyway, I was cleared by Prevent, the sort of anti-terror people, and in these independent investigations. And I must say as well, I did feel sort of bitter about it and things for a while, because obviously it had an impact. I ended up constructively dismissing myself from my role because I just thought I can't carry on like this.
Well, you can't carry on in a state of constant persecution. You can't be investigated for the same thing 4 times.
Well, it's 3 times.
We have a principle under English law of double jeopardy. Like, you can't just investigate someone for the same thing again and again and again and drag them down to constant committee meetings to give them a grilling for doing exactly the same thing that they were cleared of last time.
Yeah, but except that as we've seen throughout these last few years, people can basically do anything. The rules have been rewritten. Really, I mean, the rules are still there, but people do what they want. But the reason I was sorry, going back to this thing of like not feeling bitter, it's like looking at how, I feel lucky that I have the critical thinking capacity to be able to look at situations and come to my own independent view on them. And I must just say, when the pandemic kicked off and Boris Johnson said, many of us will lose loved ones, and I'd been watching the videos from China, people dying in the street and, you know, bodies piling up in Italy and all that kind of stuff, I was really concerned, because at that point, no one had said this was a virus which would only affect, you know, I mean, what was the average age in this country? It was 83, higher than the average age of death normally. So, but we didn't know that at the time. So I closed my school before any school in Great Britain.
Because you're actually quite an astute person. You go, I see a threat, I take the precaution.
We were told many of us will lose loved ones. Now, I sent a message to my parent community saying, look, until we know what's going on, if you want to keep your kids at home, you're welcome to. And the very same people who criticised me later for saying, oh, I think we should open up the economy, we should open up the schools, we shouldn't be having the kids vaccinated, etc. The same people who attacked me for that attacked me for saying to the parents we should close the school. And the reason is because we hadn't been given permission. As soon as we were given permission, they were like, that's okay now. Yeah.
This shows how much people live in a box, because you saw a potential threat.
Yeah.
You acted on the potential threat.
Yeah, and it was only for a short time. We still had to, no school really closed. Like every school was partially open. We had 150 out of 365 pupils in our school during the pandemic. I had 30 out of my 60 members of staff. And, you know, I was with like 200 people every single day. And for the first sort of 4 weeks, we were all like, what's going on? And then we were told, oh, children are not at risk of serious illness from COVID. It's like, great, that's bloody fantastic then, let's crack on. And it's at that point that then everyone was saying, no, you can't say that because we've been told something different.
It's ridiculous. Like, you've acted independently, making your own decisions and assessing the evidence at each point in time. So before anyone else, or before most people, right? Obviously, there's some people, a fair few people around here who were the first ones to clock on something is going on in China. Right, maybe I should take some precautions, do a bit of prepping. Right, you were the first person to clock on.
Yeah.
You assessed a potential threat. You closed down.
My wife, Sunday, was saying to me at this time, she was saying, calm down. And I was like, no, this is like really massive.
You take a precaution.
Yeah, but I was prepping, you know.
It shows that you've done an independent analysis, that you've seen this before everyone else.
Yeah. And we didn't know the facts then.
When you do know the facts.
Yeah, which was very early on because we were told.
Yeah, and then you see, actually, no, this is fine. We can open back up.
Yeah, but Chris Whitty, but do you remember, he said, okay, these are the categories of, those who are at risk. And it was basically everyone wasn't at risk apart from really elderly people and really, really sick people. Like with any sort of, flu or anything like that, that would take people out. And it was like, oh, amazing, that's really cool. But by this point, the sort of spell had been cast, and of course, if you now that we know because of things like the lockdown files, Isabel Oakeshott's expose in the Telegraph, and helpfully Matt Hancock's The Pandemic Diaries, which he foolishly and naively co-wrote with Isabel Oakeshott. So of course he puts all of that stuff in there, bragging about it, saying that him and Michael Gove.
There's something wrong in his head.
Yeah, well, I mean, so here it was him and Michael Gove who repurposed the agencies which were traditionally looking at things like ISIS and sort of Islamic sort of extremism and any sort of foreign actors who were terrorist threats onto the domestic population. Because do you remember that throughout the pandemic, all of the terrorist organisations basically had a holiday. And I remember reading somewhere, I can't remember where it was, or it was on the radio or something, there was something about the Taliban recycling. And I was like, what's going on? It's like these guys were meant to be like everything, everyone's supposed to be like against them. And then suddenly they're off the table completely.
Because they've got a new agenda.
Suddenly we are the baddies, British citizens lawfully expressing their opinions. And of course, Matt Hancock said that's what was happening. There's freedom of information requests which have also revealed all of the different people who've been surveilled and censored and deplatformed, etc. Plus government working closely with big tech to silence and censor, etc. So it's all coming out now. So I can understand to a degree why people behaved in the way that they did, because prior to this, I mean, I've always been a bit anti-establishment, a bit sort of questioning government, etc. But I wasn't really interested in big pharma. I didn't know anything about Pfizer, for example. It was only when they said that it was going to be their vaccine that was going to be used for kids, and I just googled them. So Pfizer, who are these guys? And discovered immediately, and it was a piece in the Independent, that in 2009 they had to pay out the biggest criminal fine in US history for paying kickbacks to doctors for promoting a drug that they knew would kill people. And it's like, my goodness. And then find out some more. And it's like, there's a long history of corruption with that company and others. But prior to that time, because I'm a healthy person, my family's healthy, I'd not really been interested in medications, and it's just not an area of field I've been interested in. But I certainly, I think, had more trust. And it's like, when you look at mainstream media, government, the NHS, etc., if they're all unanimously saying, look, you need to have this vaccine, it's safe and effective, then most people, because they're trusting, will go along with that. And I think I've got empathy for those people, and I just feel very blessed that for myself and my family, we could see through it. So yeah, I've kind of feel quite light about the whole thing now.
Empathy for the lemming.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, it's like I'm always finding that I'm finding out new things, and I'm evolving my thinking. And I mean, the example that just gave you of like closing my school when I was worried about COVID, and then thinking about stuff and doing research, and then changing my view. I mean, I don't feel like I know more than anyone else, and I know loads of people who are absolutely lovely, who are fully vaccinated, believe in that whole vibe, but they've got good hearts. Well, hopefully, I'm talking metaphorically. They're good people, and so and there's also people who are in the opposite camp who are like idiots. So it doesn't mean to say that if you've got to choose one path or another path, you're a good or a bad person. But I just feel it's made me more aware of the importance of critical thinking, really.
How many other people in the school shared your concerns about what was happening? What sort of percentage?
So there were some teachers who did get vaccinated at the beginning, then regretted it and changed their mind. So some people did change. There were others who didn't fall for it at all, and who were just in the same camp as me.
What were the percentages, though? You don't need to.
I think about 25%, but I'm kind of making that up a bit. It's like, I don't know for sure. But then, to be honest as well, I've got to say, within the school, I didn't talk about this stuff. So all the stuff I was saying with regards to the vaccine stuff, that was in my own time on social media. And as I said, in a moderate manner. When I was at school, I was just getting on with my job.
Yeah, and just making sure that you didn't enforce any.
Yeah, and I'd never go into like I wouldn't like go onto a soapbox, start talking to the kids about stuff. We're just getting on with the job. So, it was, this thing of being evangelized by the sort of propaganda. There were definitely people who were in that camp as well, and they saw my stance as a direct criticism of their religion.
You were a heretic to be burned.
Yes, yeah. And that's the other thing which, in this age of where it's fake inclusion, really, and fake diversity, both of which are good things if they're done properly. It's like an individual and their individual religious belief or philosophical belief or whatever, that's cool. It's like, as long as you're not hurting anyone, brilliant, and I think we need to be in that space where whatever, you might be Muslim, you might be Jew, you might be Christian, you might be atheist, whatever, right wing, you might be left wing, and it's cool. And back in the day, I remember when I was growing up, it wasn't as divided as this. You could sit around the family table with somebody who was like a Labour supporter, traditional left-wing vibe, and somebody who's conservative, and they could have a discussion and a heated debate and still love each other at the end of the discussion. And I saw it start in 2016 with the Brexit energy, where suddenly I was, again, a lone voice in the education system. So when Brexit came along, I personally thought, great, I love this idea of sovereignty. Because remember, I grew up with these ideas, these sort of stories of my war hero grandfathers and fighting for
to
freedom.
defend
And I
your
thought,
freedom.
this is awesome. Let's kind of do, I'm really up for that. That sounds really good. And I regarded myself politically as traditionally left wing. Okay. So I was like, for the working man, all that kind of stuff. This is pre sort of identity politics stuff. And anyway, I was shocked to discover that anyone who was voting Brexit were cast as, oh, you must be far right. And it's like, well, that doesn't even make any sense, because there's loads of left-leaning people who think it's a good idea to leave the EU. But that's when I started to notice these sort of this thing of like, okay, you can only have this opinion, and any other opinion is you're a baddie. It's like we're saying with the transgender stuff.
It wasn't just libertarians.
If you question the whole kind of gender ideology stuff in schools, that you must be transphobic, you must be a bigot. And it's like, it's these pejoratives, I think, which then shut down debate and which make people self-censor, because people generally don't like to be called names. They don't want to be outcast from their groups. They get worried about their jobs and so on and so forth. And, there is a social credit system operating in Great Britain. It's the unofficial social credit system, but it's there. It's cancel culture. And it's that if you say something that is politically sensitive or controversial and you're in a public position where you can be taken out essentially by being smeared in the press and deplatformed and sanctioned at work, then of course you then lose your livelihood and you can't pay the bills and so on and so forth.
Or you can be beaten up, thrown in prison.
Well, we've seen that
with
too.
Lots of people.
Yeah.
And we do have a two-tier society, don't we?
Yeah. Well, we've seen that with some of the. So you're referring to the recent riots.
Not just. I think it's more expansive. I think what you're describing is essentially a completely two-tier society where the authoritarians, right, the big statists, like the left, as I see it, they are able to do many, many, many wrong things. They're able to commit crimes. They push this nonce agenda on children. Which, the idea of pushing that in schools is absolutely disgusting. Meanwhile, if you, as someone who's liberal, who's right-wing, takes a sensible stance, right, which actually fits within all of the safeguarding procedures, because that's a big thing. But being an ex-state teaching assistant myself, safeguarding, right up until the moment that a child could actually be in danger, and then all safeguarding goes out the window.
Yeah.
So you can poison the kids, right? I remember this one time where there was this kid, I had, lots of things wrong. He shouldn't have been in school, but he's running out the classroom. They said, just follow him, right? He was climbing up this trellis work, and it went up maybe 10 foot or something like that, right? And below is just concrete slabs. And he started climbing up this trellis work, and I just grabbed him, put down, and said, "You're not doing that."
Yeah.
Okay. I then got called into the headmistress's office. He went, "We have a no-touch policy at this school." I said, "Well, you've got a dead child policy at this school." Then they sacked me.
Oh, today.
I got sacked for not letting a child die. It's this is what you get in the state schools. Meanwhile,
so there are those sorts of policies in place, and sometimes for good reason. So because you do get people, and it's sadly it's generally blokes who inappropriately touch kids and stuff. So there are safeguards in place for good reason. However, you are allowed to do something if you're saving a kid from like seriously injuring themselves or possibly dying. That's completely allowed. So that is just a fact. And I don't think anyone would be thanking you if you just like stood. And I've seen this happen. I've actually seen it happen where it was about 15 years ago or something. There was a 3-year-old opposite my house where I live, and went into the garden and I saw this child in the road, right? And it's not a busy road. I live in a village, but there was still road, and there was a car coming from one direction, a car coming from the other direction, which had just stopped, with both of the people, the driver and the passenger in the car, sitting there just looking at this kid. Now, I'd actually never seen this child before, but I went into the road, picked him up, and it's like, oh, it's my neighbour's son's kid, and it's like, there you go, oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And this bloke came out of the car and he said, oh, thanks for doing that. And I was like, yes, well, I mean, there's a child in the road. And he said, yeah, see, you've got to be careful these days because of litigation. Wouldn't want to kind of touch them. It's like, can you not? There must be for safeguarding to be effective. You have to put your self-preservation on the back burner and put children's needs ahead of your needs. That's what with the whole COVID vaccine rollout to kids. That's where my colleagues in terms of head teacher and school principal colleagues failed in their legal duty. We all have a legal duty to safeguard children against harm, as well as a moral obligation to do so. But it's written into our contracts, and that's why we have to do
that is your job, and it's a moral duty. It's a moral imperative.
It's annual safeguarding training, which talks about this exact same thing. So there will always be examples on safeguarding training where there's examples of institutionalized abuse, where a whole organization is involved in some kind of physical, emotional, sexual abuse or something, and it's known from the top to the bottom. But that even if it's like, say, 6 or 7 key people, all of the people who remain silent about it are just as responsible as those enacting the harms. It's not enough to just say, well, I'm not going to say anything because I might lose my job.
Yeah, because it is part of your job that you need to mention this. This isn't you going about your private life where you have a right to remain silent. No. This is you going about a job where it is your job to report the abuse.
And that was my thing. It's like, if you're a milkman or something, fair enough, maybe you don't want to talk about the vaccines for kids. That's not your gig. But if your job is looking after other people's children, then you must do those things. And I thought that my colleagues were going to step up when Sajid Javid said to children directly, if you want to have the vaccine, but your parents don't want you to have it, don't worry about it. You get the final say. Okay, and it will happen in your schools. We'll bring in the vaccinators, and you'll go to the school hall and they will have a chat about it. But if disagreement arises, you go ahead. Now, that was an appalling breach of trust, a breach of medical ethics. I thought, okay, now it's really on our soil here. This is your children in your schools. And there's no ambiguity about how sinister this is. You're going to stand up, and there were secondary heads locally to me who were saying not happy about it, but they wouldn't say it publicly. They were just like, well,
and they allowed this.
They allowed it to happen.
So you said a lot
because they wanted to keep their jobs and protect their mortgages and their reputation,
and they were happy to kill children.
And to be honest, I was. My reputation prior to this, I was like the golden boy of primary education. I was on Channel 4 News, did an item which was the most watched item they'd ever done to date. It was like 17 million people on Facebook alone were watching this thing on my outdoor learning stuff and all the rest of it. I was in The Guardian, I was in The Times, The Telegraph. I was like, they called me the hunky headmaster and stuff like that. It was like, and I was a bit, John Craven coming across for BBC Country File and everything. It was really, and bearing in mind I was giving kids guns and stuff. You could understand it if somebody were to say, what are you doing? You know, it's like, and what, like, you water buffalo have escaped for the 10th time. You know, do you actually know what you're doing? It's like, but they were like, no. You know, there was a piece in the Guardian called "The School with Guns and Knives on the Timetable," and Ofsted loves it. You know, so I could do no wrong until, in my own time, very moderately, I felt I questioned the necessity to vaccinate children against COVID, at which point I was outcast from the education system and seen as like this pariah. It was extraordinary. But I was perfectly willing to sacrifice my reputation and everything else in order to protect children. And I'm happy that actually ultimately the 5 to 11-year-old rollout of the vaccine, 89.5% of parents in the United Kingdom decided not to allow their child to have even a single shot. That's 89.5%. So that means that the vast majority of parents presumably arrived at the same conclusion that I did, i.e., the risks outweigh the benefits in terms of the vaccine. But it's the silence around that issue which I then found really chilling. And then I looked at other areas and thought, yeah, but that's happening in other areas as well. Like you said, sort of gender ideology, which is important to question that, you know, to go, well, why, what is the incentive there? Why is that happening? Is it necessary to tell children you're a boy, but you might not be a boy? I mean, all this kind of stuff.
Look at the roots of it. It all comes from nonsense. It comes from abuse. You look at John Money, who pioneered all of this. He was just abusing these children, and everything comes from all of these fake studies where these children were being abused, and it's continual abuse where they're picking on children, often tomboys or children who are autistic, and they're drugging them up, they're indoctrinating them in a completely anti-scientific way to deny biology, using this linguistic term of gender, because humans don't have gender. Like, we have sexes.
Yeah.
Like words have genders.
I think it's unfortunate as well because all of these things, they actually marginalise and sort of demonise people who. So I've known adults who for decades have been transgender, and I believe that is their vibe. You know, there was somebody at school. There was at college. There was a bloke who dressed as a woman, and that was his thing. And it wasn't weird or anything. It was like, but it's like 0.0001% or whatever it is of the population, and it's fine. It's like people do what they want. But it's when it's then this ideology, which then has to be scoped out onto children more broadly, and saying to children, I mean, I had to say to one teacher who said that there were 100 different genders, and I had to say, look, that you're just wrong. But of course, they were kind of, at that time, they were getting information from lots of different sort of campaign groups and things, and indiscriminately getting stuff. And bearing in mind, I do feel that the intellectual caliber of within the teaching profession has been diluted over the last sort of 30 years. When I went into the profession, there was a kind of interrogation of our intellectual capacity at interview, and we used to have to do things like study Vygotsky and Piaget, and the Russian thinkers, etc., and the have a real grounding in educational
pedagogy,
ethos, and philosophy, to the degree that it would also include the Socratic form of questioning, i.e. critical thinking, and yet it was like in the last complaint that was made against me, not only was it the this prevent one, which was to do with the vaccine rollout to children, it also said that I promoted the idea of teaching critical thinking. And all I was told was that the complaint had come from a group of concerned teachers. So if you think about that, it's like, so I remember when I was at secondary school, my favourite teacher was a gentleman who I'm still in touch with called Mr. John Winter. and he was a genius teacher. I think he's one of the reasons that I was inspired to become a teacher. And he was like Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society.
Wow.
He was full power, and it was a fairly tough school. It's a secondary modern school that I went to, and the kids were kind of a bit unruly and things. And he was so eccentric and left field that you almost like you were scared by it. So even like the most tough kids would be just like, whoa, what's he doing? And he was an English teacher, and he taught us to write with passion and to have a love of language and a love of reading, and and he was constantly questioning and was very sort of anti-establishment in a way which wasn't where he wasn't pushing his ideas onto us. He was just getting us to question. And I think that was the norm then. It's like teachers were people who believed in education, who believed in empowering children. Now it doesn't feel like it's about empowering children. It feels like it's about giving them ideologies to adopt. And there are loads of teachers and teaching assistants and heads and school principals who don't agree with this stuff that's going on, because I've had conversations with lots of them.
How many?
Oh, I would say, so actual in like one to face-to-face conversations, probably about 30 people, but from different schools across time. But I think that's a good it's a good indication that it's quite widespread, where people say, oh yeah, but you can't say anything about it. And that's the key thing. And we've seen it again with the over the last few months with things like anti-Semitism, like having, and this kind of lack of nuance in terms of looking at political things, like say the stuff happening in Gaza.
Exactly, because the thing is, Judaism's an ideology, Islam's an ideology, and we're English. It's our right of free speech to question any ideology and to completely disagree. I mean,
I'm referring to the. So I'm no fan of the Israeli regime. I think they're appalling. I don't agree with their foreign policy. I don't think that. I thought they were awful to their citizens during lockdowns. There are freedom fighters in Israel who I'm connected with, who fought just as hard as we did here during all of that time. And people like Dee Dee, who's a teacher at Hope, who actually tutors my children in classics, and she's Jew. She's born in Israel. She has friends and family who are Palestinian and who are Jewish. She's very much into the peaceful vibe and wants everyone to be one. And yet she, with the anti-Semitism that was allowed to kind of run sort of unbridled through that support of Hamas in this country, she was feeling, as lots of other British Jews did, unsafe within their own country.
I've got to challenge this term of anti-Semitism though, because like you've got the actual Semitic people who are the people who speak the Semitic languages, and then you've got this sort of Nazi ideology, and it's genuinely a Nazi ideology that Jews are a race, which I don't believe. I don't believe there is this mythical Nazi Jewish race. Because this is a racist concept to view Jews as a race when it clearly is an ideology. So I just completely reject the term anti-Semitism unless you somehow have a vendetta against a set of languages. I just have to reject
so
that.
I don't know enough about that to be able to comment at all, other than I'm going on perhaps a different view, but the concept is a group of people being discriminated against based on their religion or belief or where they're from. Okay, and I don't agree with that in any way, shape, or form. I don't care if it's Muslims. It's like, and this is the thing with the stuff that's happened recently with the riots and things. It's like most Muslim people are great and perfectly fine. I go to barbers to get like beard done and stuff in East London frequently, and it's usually different places, and they're always Muslim guys, might be Arabic, might be Moroccan, might be Egyptian, whatever. I wouldn't be like lying back in a thing with some bloke with a knife there if I was concerned he was going to cut me up, And I've worked with Muslim communities as well, who've been absolutely brilliant. When all of the stuff was kicking off and we were being told, oh, there's widespread riots, I was in East London for 2 weeks. And I was in one of the most densely populated Muslim parts of London. My wife's Punjabi, Sikh, Indian. So he's not Muslim, but we go to these places because they've got great food and there's great shops and stuff. And I was wondering, it's down Green Lanes. I was wondering, it was sort of like it was 10 o'clock at night. I was wondering what the vibe would be like because all the pictures in the press showed things on fire and white people and like Asian people going against each other and stuff. And it was nothing was happening. It was like it was really chilled. Everyone was happy. Nothing was kicking off. There were whites there were Asians there. There was no tension. There wasn't even the tension that there was during the ISIS years. I remember the ISIS years where it was palpable. You could feel there was a weird vibe going on and stuff could kick off. There was none of that. And I thought, this is really interesting. And then the following week, I went to central London twice to out for dinner and to the theatre and things like that, and thought, right, well, this is where mainstream media is based, and this is where central government is based, and they're telling us that the country's on fire. There's probably going to be kicking off there. Got to be a little bit careful because I've got my 7-year-old twin daughters, so be a little bit careful. The same thing. Nothing was happening at all. There was sort of Muslim people, but mainly sort of Arabic there, and there wasn't any kind of weird vibe. Nothing was kicking off, and it's like, oh right, so this is one of those situations where yes, there are riots, but they're not as widespread as we're being told. They're not as big as we're being told. And then I just thought, yeah, of course, during the lockdown years, when there were the lockdown protests, and the biggest one, there were about 1 million people in central London on one of them, that didn't have any mainstream media coverage or comment from government at all.
Whereas these are much smaller,
and yet
and they
these
get
tiny
loads.
ones were huge. And then it's like, okay, and then of course they came out immediately with, oh right, well, the last thing we want is the far right burning down mosques and stuff. So what we'll do is we'll censor the internet. That's what has to happen. It's like, oh right, so that's why you've done it. It's not about any genuine concern for people who are concerned about immigration or different communities. They don't care about like protecting Muslims or Jews or the white English population at all. It's about control and censorship, and that's why that whole situation was, the flames were fanned and that it was given so much attention because it justifies the solution, which is increased censorship.
So, in terms of emails, how many emails have you got from other head teachers around the country?
There's private messages like DMs and
How many
things.
messages have you got from?
Oh, probably only about like 3 individual messages. I've had more face-to-face conversations with people rather, because people are also quite cautious about writing things down when it's. I've had more people from outside the profession say, oh, I admire what you're doing, but I can't say anything because if I did, then it would affect my work in X, Y, or Z. That thing that loads of people have had, that kind of comment, or people who share kind of memes or WhatsApp stuff and say, can you put this out there?
Because they're scared.
Yeah, it's, I don't have a big catalogue of written evidence.
That's okay.
But what I can say is like always return to that statistic that I gave you, from the 5 to 11-year-old cohort in the United Kingdom, 89.5% of kids didn't have a single shot. Now that's despite a multi-billion pound marketing campaign and all of the coercion that went along with it. Parents still decided not to allow their kids to have it. So although there was silence publicly from the vast majority of people, they clearly arrived at, well, I say clearly, I can only assume that they arrived at a broadly similar conclusion to my own in terms of the risk-benefit ratio.
So, do you want to talk a little bit about your involvement here at Hope and what you're doing now in terms of education?
So I've got 4 children with my wife. I've got a 27-year-old called Tally. There's a 20-year-old called Iggy. And then we have Luna and Star, who are 7-year-old twin daughters. And unlike my older boys who went to my school and then went to secondary school and on to college and stuff, we decided to home educate our youngest 2 because we just felt after the experience of the pandemic, it felt like we could ensure their safety more because some of the things that were happening in schools during the pandemic were just clearly not safe. And so we looked at lots of different ways to home educate. And what we do is we have a kind of mixture of different things. So they do have they have like an English and maths tutor who interestingly has got a totally different view to mine regarding vaccines, lockdowns and everything. Completely different. And she's a fantastic English and maths tutor, which is what I want for my kids. So we can agree to disagree on those issues, but what she gets in terms of results with the kids on with the reading, writing, maths is wonderful, and that's my background as well. So of course, then I consolidate their learning in other ways at home doing that. They also have a piano teacher. They are learning Indian classical music because their mum, Sandeep Sitara's Punjabi Sikh, and that tradition comes with a massive musical tradition. And her father, Professor Siddle Singh Sitara, was one of the founding members of the modern Sikh tradition in Great Britain. He was a blind guy, blind from the age of 3, and yet he was a master tabla player, sitar player, Indian classical violin, etc. So they learn from this lady in Delhi online every week, and they play the harmonium and stuff. It's really cool. They also do horse riding, swimming. Then here they go to DD for classics, and DD is one of the most gifted teachers I think I've ever come across. She actually was in the mainstream system previously, and now she's out of the system. And so she's done things like taking the kids through the whole, Homer's Odyssey, and really goes deep into sort of the mythological hero's quest, etc. And really brings through her storytelling talents, because she used to be an actor as well, really brings these stories to life. So they learn about the sort of old traditions and history, etc. Then the other thing that they do is they do tap dancing with Katie Joe, which I just think is like really funny and brilliant. And it's like Katie Joe's like, she was a West End performer
In
and
Cats.
a professional, and she teaches my kids tap dancing and also singing and drama as well. So really good. It's for me. It's about like the caliber of the teacher. That's where I want my kids to go. What I don't like is the media slandering of hope, and it's specifically this idea that it's teaching kids conspiracy theories. That's not happened once in with my kids. It's like they don't come here to be told, oh, people didn't land on the moon or something like that. I mean, it's not the point. It's like, that, and that's not how you get critical thinkers anyway. You get critical thinkers by getting children to have a love of learning and being inquiring about everything.
And having a discussion.
How does this work? What happens, and looking at things, taking things apart. And I know that you teach like that.
In history, I mean, we looked at, the princes in the tower.
Yeah.
Right? Everyone, more or less, there's a consensus around the idea that Richard III killed his nephews, right? However, that is a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
It's a conspiracy involving the king to murder his nephews, who are now alleged to be bastards.
Yeah.
Massive conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
So we looked into it. Most of the kids determined that they thought Richard III had killed them. There was a bit of debate. Some said, well, there are other reasons. Obviously, Harry Tudor has a few motivations to get them out of the way. If they had been kept alive and they were there and they're inconvenient, then they could have been swept out the way. It's possible. But well, either way, is some sort of conspiracy's gone on.
Yeah.
But you should have these discussions. You should have a debate. And
it's about inquiry, isn't it? But it's interesting, the sort of use of the term conspiracy theory. 'Cause I think, am I right, that it was the CIA which coined
popularized
the phrase,
term, and pushed it in order to, is it essentially psychological warfare? They used it as a slur. They created this slur.
Yeah. I don't think that necessarily people within what could be termed the freedom movement are always that helpful with this stuff. Some people, because it's like, I think it's good. It's like, so that's why I've tried to keep my messaging historically like limited to the COVID vaccine rollout to kids, because I am interested in other kind of stuff, but I don't want to talk about it because it will dilute that particular message. And so I'll give an example. I mean, I've not really got into it for a long time, but like prior to the pandemic, I used to quite like watching like UFO stuff and Richard Gere talking about UFOs and things like that. And I just thought it was like, because it's fun. I mean, I would love there to be like aliens. I've never seen a spaceship. I've never like anything like that. But
They haven't probed you.
like lots of lots of guys like think it's quite a cool thing to just like think about and stuff. Now, I used to occasionally on my social media platforms put something up about it. You know, it's like when like say, I don't know, New York Times would say something about stuff or whatever, because it's exciting, and it would be, my inner child would be kind of lit up by that vibe. But I discovered immediately, as soon as this stuff happened with the pandemic, that to continue to share my enthusiasm for that field, which has kind of waned over time, because I haven't got time really.
I mean, Bob Lazar's interview with Joe Rogan's going.
Oh, it's awesome. I mean, there's some really cool stuff. I love all of that kind of vibe, but it's like it would not have been helpful for the objective, which was for a parent to think, okay, actually, maybe I do need to think about this before I give my child this injection. If they then like, oh, he's like, he thinks Bob Lazar is like, he was working on reverse engineered technology. Oh, he's a nutcase. I'm not going to listen to that bloke. That wouldn't have done them, the child, or anyone else.
And meanwhile, you're just sharing it out, going, "Oh, this is interesting."
Yeah, exactly. And there's also this idea that somehow every single conspiracy theory must be true. It's like, no, that's not.
I call them conspiracy junkies. I think they're conspiracy theorists, so people who understand that there are conspiracies in the world.
I mean, I love talking to them around the fire.
And will theorise and go, okay, is this true, is that true? And some of them are going to be true and some of them aren't. But then there are the conspiracy junkies who every single thing has to be a conspiracy. I don't know. Just some of the most ridiculous ones.
Yeah, and unfortunately that does then, I think that sort of damages the kind of more serious, I don't want to be disparaging about people, because actually I love, some people who've been like literally had taken every single red pill in the packet and some more. They're the best people to talk to around the fire when you're having a whiskey and chilling, and right here sort of thing. Brilliant, being taken down a rabbit hole. You don't have to necessarily agree with them, but it's like, it's cool. It's like, wow, that's so. But with regards to sort of getting the job done in terms of freedom of speech and promoting sort of a certain, like, my educational ethos, etc., it's not helpful for me to
your brand as a public figure, because I mean, you could try speaking about every little thing. You could be speaking about some bug that's going extinct in Outer Mongolia. That's not helpful to what you're focusing on, and because you've only got so much bandwidth, and it's always getting thinner.
So that's where I think what the media have done with this place, talking about it being conspiracy school or something.
Well, so there's that. They were okay with you taking kids shooting guns, but they're not okay with me taking kids and shooting crossbows and bows to show them how the Battle of Agincourt happened, which is, that's just a great history session.
Yeah.
Right? You need to learn about these weapons, right? You need to learn about swords, you need to learn about gambesons, chainmail, all of the armor, and you make it practical. And that's fun.
I've just got to quickly say something, actually. I've got 2 emails from Ofsted categorically saying that Hope is not under investigation. So this whole thing of it being an illegal school, this organisation has been this sort of education hub for educating families, has been going for well over 2 years and has not been investigated once. It's still operable. It's still happening. And so, and there's 2 emails from Ofsted, which I've shown the Times, because I complained when I was in there, and they were like, so when they first wrote about me, it was because I'd been anti-lockdown. It's interesting because now that's normal, and hardly anyone says they're pro-lockdown, including the Times. They've run articles saying it was a disaster, but at this particular point, I was an anti-lockdowner and involved in an illegal school. Well, I've never been involved in a legal school. I would never be involved in a legal school, and I've got 2 emails from Ofsted confirming that, and I've shown it to the Times, and I've also gone to the Complaints Commission. So there's that element, which I don't think
retracted, have they?
No. They came back and they said, well, that's not how our Times readers would see it. They are the exact words,
and they're dirty smear.
Yeah, and also that that really irked me, because I don't mind people saying stuff about me. To be honest, I'm over that now. I really don't. I don't mind. I'm not attached anymore to that thing of somebody calling me whatever they want to call me, or anything else they can do, because I've really gone there with what's happened. I've taken multiple hits, and I've been through worse. I've had close personal deaths, including my first wife and my sister and 2 of her kids, and so on and so forth. I've been through much worse, so I can take a lot of stuff. But I don't like it when people target my children, and I think that's weird and wrong. And they mentioned my kids in that article, and and my wife, and they should have kept them out of it. But anyway, so be it. That's what I did.
And also, it's a whole community as well. This is your community.
But there's also this thing, that this idea of like, okay, far right, and yet 25% of the kids here are Black and Asian. My wife is dark-skinned Indian. I don't know anyone who is racist within this community.
That is taking, the fictitious narrative on the far right, the great sort of psyop.
Yeah, but I don't like that term. I know you say it's like libertarian, but it's in the public consciousness.
Factually,
it basically means you're a Nazi, doesn't it?
Far left. He was absolutely far left wing.
Yes,
National Socialist German Workers' Party. I know. And this is what the left did after the war. They went, okay, these guys, everyone thinks they're the bad guys. What do? We say that they're the right, and then that will mean they won't look at us, the socialists over here.
Yeah.
And what happened after the war? Well, the socialists took more and more control. To the point it was stifling. They controlled the whole economy. Right? Germany, ended rationing before we did, because our government was doing what Hitler was doing to a lesser extent. Obviously, not mass executing people, but taking complete control of the economy, direct command economy, state control, which is exactly what happened. And you've got this, these layers of fictional representations that try calling this ridiculously socialist economy, ridiculously government controlled economy, capitalist. It's mental.
Yeah,
it's mental.
But it's the weaponizing of certain terms. So
it's the greatest lie in history. It is the greatest lie.
So they say far right, and by that they mean Nazi, even though, like you said, that was this National Socialist Workers' Party, left wing under Hitler. But nonetheless, in the public consciousness, that's what they think. Which is why whenever there were the protests, or for example the truckers' protests, so there's a big Punjabi Sikh community in Canada, massive, and loads of them are truckers as well. And you'd see those protests with the guys with their massive turbans. They are Indian Canadian Indians, Indigenous people as well, and old ladies and kids and stuff. And Trudeau was like, well, they're Nazis, even though you could see that isn't the case. And it's the same with this place. It's like, my wife's brown, you're black, there's
50%,
whatever, but you're not a white supremacist, are you?
Only half the week.
Yeah, Dee Dee's Jew. It's like, it's actually a multi-faith, multicultural environment of people where the one common theme is that people believe in their own sovereignty and individual empowerment, and there isn't one sort of homogenous ideological we must all believe this, which is something I think which we have to be very careful of within the freedom movement more broadly as well, because mass formation psychosis can happen on the other side just as easily as it can happen in the sort of
we've got to our main value is freedom, and that's what we
exactly. But it doesn't really matter what something is like in reality. When they go for you, they really go for you. And so I haven't enjoyed those aspects, but that's kind of an inevitability. And just going back to the Canadian thing, wasn't it hilarious, really, that after Trudeau condemned the truckers for being, right-wing Nazis and all the rest of it, that he actually had a real Nazi go into Parliament and get a standing ovation. Do you remember that?
Yep, and
it was like
Nazi.
An actual member of the SS.
They found the last living Nazi.
And then when they were eventually challenged on that, they were like, "Oh, we didn't know." It's like,
you didn't know you found the last living Nazi in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, I've seen the inversion of values and core beliefs and making it a taboo to call these things out. I think that's what's been happening over the last few years. That's what happened with the vaccine rollout to kids, the inversion of medical ethics. That's what's happened with the PSHE, SHE in schools, etc.
But we've got the tonic here, haven't we? We've got the tonic, and you've been down here at this festival.
Yeah.
And you've been running the whiskey bar.
Yes.
How's the festival been so far?
It's good. So we couldn't come until yesterday. So we would normally have come on the Thursday and stayed the duration. But my mother-in-law had a fall just about 2 weeks ago, and she's been staying with us for the last week, and it was actually the first time she stayed with us, and it was really lovely and really good, but we just needed to be there to, everything from helping her up the stairs and down the stairs to whatever, and we didn't think that we'd be able to come, and that was okay because that was the priority. And then on Saturday, drove her back to London, and Sandeep's sister got back from Australia, so she's looking after her, and we were able to rock up yesterday, and it was nice. Like to kind of set a really good fire in our fire dish. Not very good at selling whiskey, to be honest, because I find it really difficult to charge people for things. I think because I'm an educator. So some bloke came up to me.
Being in the government sector.
This bloke came up to me yesterday, and he said, "So how much is it?" I said, "It's free." It just came out of my mouth, and Sandeep had to say, like, "Look, just say donation if you want to do donation." She's better at that than me. Whereas with me, it's like, I do struggle with that, but anyway, doesn't matter. It's more about the vibe, and then the guitars come out, and Orlando did a really lovely set last night, which was really beautiful around the fire, and just people coming and going, and really nice. I'm not sure what time we went to bed, but the sun was coming up, and it felt good.
Well, sorry to drag you here for an interview when you're a little bit hungover.
Yeah, no, I'm actually okay because I was. I do like a whiskey, but because I was tending the fire, I had to be careful because I had to like straddle sort of people as I came across and put logs on. So I thought it was better, don't want to be like falling into the flames or something. So just a few shots, and
Britain's most outspoken head teacher combusts.
Yeah, they'd love that, wouldn't they?
Well, Mike, where can people find you and find out about the sessions that you're running in terms of the new education that you're doing?
So the temple in Sussex, which is this space that we've built, it was my wife's vision, and she's built it on our land. Amazing space, hexagonal oak structure. We talk about that on Facebook. My wife's Sandeep Kaur Sitara. Kaur is Kaur. Sitara, Sitara, and her yoga sessions, etc., on there. I put out the stuff about the rewilding childhood, which is like forest school stuff that we do on my Facebook, Mike Fairclough. My main sort of platform is X, which is at one Mike Fairclough, and that's where my sort of like campaigning and things are mostly, and a bit on Instagram. Can't remember what my tag is though, it doesn't really matter. And then books, the most recent one is The Hero's Voice, with the foreword written by Dr. Peter McCullough, who has been an amazing support of mine, and also Lawrence Fox, who's also been really supportive throughout this time. Peter McCullough also hooked me up with Robert Kennedy Jr., who's also in the background given me sort of moral encouragement with my most recent book and given me some advice with publishers, etc. It actually went with Kingfisher Publishing in the end, with a great guy called Rick Armstrong, who's like, you should interview him. It's amazing. He's the CEO and director of the publishing house. So The Hero's Voice, you can find that on all major bookstores, etc. And then my previous books, which are Playing with Fire, Wild Thing, and Rewilding Childhood. Rewilding Childhood is probably the most well written one, but yeah, that's where you can find me.
Thanks for watching. Please give us a like, a share, a subscribe, hit the notification button if you would like to help. We've got a Patreon and a Subscribe Star, so please head on over there and pledge us some support if you want to keep this journalism going. We've got a professional studio here, and we could do with your support to keep these great conversations coming.